Hello and welcome to today's video. So this time I'm talking to David from the Collecting Christie website. So sit back, relax, and let's get to it. So hello David, thanks for coming along today.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Oh, brilliant. So David, I've been following your website, the Collecting Christie website for, well, it must be a few years now. How did that come about then?
Yeah, it came about as a result of me deciding really to just document my passion for Christie. So having been a collector for many years and a fan of Christie for many years, I developed a lot of knowledge in the world of Christie books and just decided it was time to share it. And it really became a vehicle for sharing knowledge.
Right. I mean, when I look at the website now, and I know you've been concentrating recently on a lot of paperbacks, which is obviously my passion, it really is becoming the number one resource if you're looking at collecting Christie nowadays, isn't it, online?
I think so, and I hope it will continue to be so, but that is the goal, is for it to be a resource for people who want all that information related to collecting Christie.
Yeah, I mean, I am finding it more and more invaluable, so please keep up the good work.
Okay, thank you.
So going back to your your origins, as it were, how did you first come across Agatha Christie?
Well, I read Agatha Christie as a teenager, as many people did. But as far as collecting Christie, it really started when I was at university, because I developed a passion for going into used bookshops.
Ah, yes.
And when I was in one used bookshop in particular, I remember finding an old Agatha Christie hardback in dust jacket. It was a reprint, but there was something really appealing about something from the 1930s, and it just had a very kind of dusty, organic feel to it, and it kind of hooked me. Yeah,
I imagine a lot of people watching this channel know exactly what you're describing there. What was the title? Do you remember?
That was Murder of Roger Ackroyd.
Ah, right, okay. So you read that one.
Yep.
Got hooked on Christie.
Yeah, well, that's what got me hooked on collecting Christie as far as hardbacks. It was a triangle reprint in the US.
All right,
very cheap, still cheap today, but it kind of gets that collector vibe going.
Yeah, absolutely. And nowadays, I mean, what does your collection encompass, David? Is it predominantly hardback, but you're dabbling in paperback now, or...?
It was predominantly hardback, and certainly both American and British first editions, as well as a few global editions.
Yeah.
It expanded into first edition paperbacks, and that brought me exposure to a lot of different publishers. Right. But certainly there are more paperback choices than there are hardback choices. So as you well know, it's a slippery slope.
Absolutely. I've been bowled over, and once again, massive congratulations on just about completing the Fontana checklist. I mean, that's been what a work that's been.
Yes.
Must have taken, well, how long has it taken to put together? A few years, I think, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think for many readers of Christie, certainly in the UK, Fontana paperbacks are what they grew up with. Yeah.
Absolutely. Everyone will be able to say Tom Adams, and they know who you're talking about because they're so well remembered. I remember my mum having them, those in the pan editions, and really loving them. And today there's just something about them which... you can't quite put your finger on, but they're just so good, aren't they? They really are. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think today we see too many authors where their books are just sold by having their name in large font. And to some degree, the artwork has disappeared from a lot of books today.
That's it. It's like a lost art, isn't it? You know, it's so much probably cheaper to produce. Someone on a computer would just knock up, the title and name of the author with very little design aesthetic, and it's just something magical. I've said this before, collecting old paperbacks, particularly really vintage ones like 30s and 40s ones, that are now at such an age that you pick up this book and you just don't quite, it's almost intangible, the feeling that you get when you're opening an old 80-year-old paperback, and if it's in nice condition as well, you think, where's this particular book been? It's just, that's the joy of collecting vintage paperbacks for me. And if you combine a really nice collectible paperback with a collectible author, then that's when it becomes real magic. And you've got to say, Agatha Christie is amongst the most collectible authors in the world, isn't she?
Oh, I would think for a fiction writer, she has to be the most collected.
Yeah.
Certainly because of the breadth of how many novels she wrote, 66 novels and over 150 short stories. So while there are other very collectible authors, let's say Ian Fleming, certainly It's just the scope of Christie's work that I think makes her probably the most collected.
That's right. Even if you were just to try and, well, like we've discussed, to try and get the first paperback editions, that is not an easy task at all, is it? Or even trying to get all the ones published by Pan or Penguin or Fontana. I mean, any one of those is a real challenge, isn't it? All of them.
It becomes a Herculean task. Yeah,
Herculean
to use Hercules.
Task, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I would also say, going back to your comment on paperback art, I think one of the things that's appealing, particularly for paperbacks probably from the 50s onwards, is they were initially hiring artists who then also did illustrating on the side. I think by the time we got into the 1990s, a lot of our artwork was taken in-house to the production design teams of publishers, as opposed to actually contracting artists to do the cover work for them.
Yeah, and that's sadly, it's a shame. It's a shame that it just went that way. It is, I believe, a lost art. And publishers, I think when publishers make an effort, like you do see a bigger name author, they do sort of pull the stops out. They do nice decorated like end papers and boards and things like that. And I'm not quite so keen on multiple different editions of the same book with different chains, for example. There might be an exclusive to foils or Waterstones or an online version. I'm not so keen on that, but I think for something special, there are collectors out there who love that sort of stuff. I would love to see a range of like classic Tom Adams covers come back into print. I mean, wouldn't that be amazing?
I think it would be lovely.
And I think they'd sell.
I mean, Collins did come back and republish the facsimile editions of their hardbacks, which they did in the early 2000s, where they reprinted all the dust jackets, but in slightly smaller format books, so that you couldn't like marry the jacket onto an old one.
That's true. They were uniform, weren't they? Uniform size.
The uniform size. But absolutely, I think there's a market to bring back some of these original designs.
That facsimile series was fantastic. I borrowed my sister's because she's got the full run, which I filmed here in a couple of videos, and I actually contacted, I forget the name of the company that published them, but I said, any chance of these ever coming back? Because a lot of their series, they give it a few years, then they reprint them. They said, not with these.
I think I'll get the pronunciation wrong, but I think it was Hachette.
Oh, Hachette. No, that's right. It was Hachette. I remember writing to them about that, Hachette Partworks, and they said no, sadly, which is a shame, because I think they could sell again and again, but the prices of those facsimiles have once again started to creep up, haven't they?
Absolutely, particularly if they've got the original magazine supplements and everything that came with them, because they were all kind of bundled together.
That's right. And I remember before they did the partwork, I was in the book game, and they were published by Collins with belly bands separately before the partwork reprint series, and I think they're even more sought after with those belly bands, although apart from the belly band there's not a lot of difference between them and the ones that got printed in the partwork. No, that's absolutely fascinating. So David, you reside in America, but you're over here quite a bit, aren't you, for all Christie-related stuff?
I am, yes, actually born here in Devon, and my whole family is over here in England. So I do find myself over here quite often. Oh,
brilliant. And we were hoping to meet up at the last Christie Festival, weren't we? But myself and my sister, we tried to get tickets for the, was it the Christie on TV one with the swinging Christie chaps, which was would have been fantastic, but it had sold out, so we want to make sure we get in early this time. Are you going to be over for the festival this year?
I will be over for the festival this year, so the festival is always the week around Agatha Christie's birthday. So she was born September 15th, so whatever week that falls in, that's the festival, so people can calendar it off. And the fringe events are already up for sale, so kind of the fun events just went up for sale about a week ago.
Right.
And then later this month, they will launch what they call the literary events. So basically the first part of the week is kind of fun things related to Christie's life. Tea at Burr Island and various trips to kind of places Christie frequented. And then the second half of the week is generally bringing in topics and speakers more related to actually Christie's work or people who write similar literature today.
Right, I would know that. Yeah, fantastic. We will, now that you say that there's a few tickets up for grabs, I'm going to make a point of diving there now, and I'll put a link to that in the description, of course, down below. So going back to the website now, so do you update it about once a week? Is it there or thereabouts with something new?
Yeah, I would say on average I'm putting on maybe 3 new articles a month.
Okay, yeah.
And it will change based upon maybe either focusing on a series of paperbacks or focusing on a first edition hardback or something related. Sometimes it's artwork related or auctions that are coming up in the marketplace, but always with that Christie theme.
In fact, speaking of auctions, one of the pieces I found fascinating, I really liked your sort of commentary on it, was Charlie Watts's collection. Now that, well, I mean, it was mind-blowing, wasn't it?
It was mind-blowing.
I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. All those signed copies and association copies, personalised copies to P.G. Wodehouse and people like that. I couldn't believe it.
And when you think that was just his Christie portion of the collection that I profiled, he was a prolific collector, but it does show maybe you need really deep pockets to get some of this stuff and to build those sorts of collections. So paperback collecting, I think, is still an affordable way for people to enjoy collecting their favorite authors.
So that's it. I mean, with a few exceptions, we've mentioned like the services editions, which are, very, very scarce to begin with. And then when they turn up, they're usually in poor shape. And perhaps some of the early Collins White Circles and the first handful of the Penguins are all now expensive books, aren't they? They're all, over in three figures, shall we say. But if you look beyond that, sort of the mid-50s, Christie's, even in tip-top shape, you really shouldn't be paying much more than like 10 to 15, even if they're really, really nice. So, but usually, I mean, you just need to look on eBay. You can see fantastic job lots, they work at like £1 a book.
Right.
And those lots are around there. And so it doesn't take a lot to get started to collect Christie in paperback.
Absolutely.
And
and I always say collect what you love, right?
Yeah,
Which is,
absolutely.
You've got to enjoy looking at them. You've got to enjoy holding them and hopefully reading them. But sometimes if they get too valuable, you should have a reading copy as well.
Well, yeah. So one of the other things, this is a problem for someone who loves, all different publishers, is you do end up with the same book from multiple different publishers in different printings, and you must have that yourself. Yeah,
absolutely. Particularly on the hardback first editions. Some of those books, I love looking at them and holding them, but I'm not going to sit down with my cup of coffee and read over it. Yeah,
no, absolutely not. So that's like you said, the real valuable early ones you have to be super careful with. So do you have like a reading set?
I do.
Yeah. I thought you might actually.
But usually they're paperbacks.
Yeah,
so,
paperbacks,
and particularly the Fontana paperbacks. I still love pulling out the Fontana paperbacks to read, and there's something just very comforting about those books.
That's brilliant. Yeah. Now, during lockdown throughout the world, for some reason, Christie had a massive revival in popularity. Certainly, all the book dealers I was speaking to, I can't keep them in stock. And I went to Hay on Wye, and the bookshops were saying the same as like Murder and Mayhem. She's one of the hottest authors out there at the moment. And this was sort of like 2020, 2021. She became really hot. Any sort of thoughts about why that happened? Why this sudden resurgence in popularity?
I was also aware of that observation from a lot of dealers. And if I were to attribute it to anything, I would attribute it to what I would call kind of comfort food, which is, Christie is also one of those books that a lot of people say, I take it on holiday, or, if I want to take it on an airplane, I can be mildly distracted. I've read it before. I maybe know the plot, but it's an easy read. It's a comfortable read, and I can relax while I'm reading it. I think that kind of comfort food is perhaps why it was so appealing during lockdown as well. Yeah,
I hadn't really thought of that, but that makes a lot of sense in actual fact. You know what you're going to get with Agatha Christie. They have a level of quality, and if there's so many of them that I know if you're reading them again and again, you're going to get to know them. Like, you know what happens in a Sherlock Holmes story, for example. I'm less familiar with Christie, so, and it's been so long since I read some of them that where I am with her now, when I reread them, I'm actually, pleasantly surprised, so I'm enjoying it that way.
I think it's almost like watching, when you watch films for a second time, you're like, oh, there's a new scene I didn't really pay attention to, or some dialogue I didn't really pay attention to. Christie's absolutely the same way. There's a lot of depth to her novels that people on the surface think are superficial. But I think things that are just well written, that read easily, sometimes get too discounted to be too simple.
Right.
But there's some wonderful bits in those Christie stories. I call them Easter eggs, where she uses a lot of historical references to either Roman or Greek mythology, a lot of kind of cultural tie-ins, and many of them were very accurate for the period of time when they were written. So if you view it through the lens of start off by always knowing when was the book first written. I may have a 1970s paperback, but if it was written in 1939, I need to be reading it through the lens of the world at war, because it adds value to that story when you read it.
That's a really good point. If someone was never read Agatha Christie, but is definitely tempted, and we piqued their interest now, and maybe even thinking of collecting them, is there any particular titles you would recommend to start with? Anything that's really outstanding to get them hooked?
Well, I think most people have probably seen many of her films if they haven't read. So they may have seen Murder on the Orient Express or Death on the Nile. So I would generally steer away from starting with one of those, because I think you might correlate it to the movie.
Yes.
So I think her heyday was probably the 1930s. And I think many of the novels from the 1930s would satisfy any reader. So, there are some I really enjoy from that period, whether it's Murder in Mesopotamia, Appointment with Death, Dumb Witness. There's a lot that were from that same period that aren't as well known because they didn't have as many films made of them.
Right. Okay, well, that's some good pointers there. Yeah, definitely. And from a collecting point of view, you've got all the hardbacks now, have you?
Yes.
Everyone, British and American.
Yes.
Wow, that's quite. Oh, that's incredible. I mean, I've looked at some of the photos on your website, and they are just beautiful to look at, and they are so nice. Like I say, handled with care, of course.
Yes.
But how far are you in with paperbacks then? Is that going to be a much longer job? Might even be harder?
With paperbacks, I primarily focused on first printings of Christie books in paperback,
right,
as opposed to a specific publisher. So while I have a broad range of Fontana's, it's more the first printings of her books, which took me to more unique publishers, both in the US and globally. You and I were discussing the Albatross earlier, which is one of those publishers that had many first printings of her book in paperback, but was kind of a European offshoot of the Crime Club. And so those I really enjoy looking for. And in the States in particular, there are a number of small publishers who only printed a few Christie books. But I find those rewarding, and that's really been my focus is first printings, as opposed to whole collections from a publisher.
That's true. I am on the I am on the second side of it. We're trying to get full runs by publishers, but I don't mind. I love the uniformity, and I love to see how over time, how styles change. You see it with Penguin from the 30s to the 70s. What a period of transformation.
Absolutely.
The other thing we were talking about was how in the 1950s, how Christie was published by big publishers simultaneously. So Pan Books, Penguin, and Fontana were all really trying to outdo themselves to be, great. We're going to do Christie proud. And you mentioned about her literary editor. What a job he must have done. To pull off such a feat. Just fantastic. And you mentioned in Exeter was where his archive is kept.
Correct.
Exeter University.
Yeah, University of Exeter has a lot of the archives from her publisher and agent. And so certainly one can learn a lot by going to some of his archives and reading some of the historical correspondence. Yeah.
And do you have much contact with the Christie estate yourself through having such a prominent website?
So Agatha Christie Limited, or the Christie estate that also has a substantial amount of her archives, obviously, has been very helpful. If there's a particular area I really need some guidance on, or I'm trying to get a piece of information, I can contact them. They'll look into it and follow up with me. It's been great.
Do they have their own archivist or a couple of archivists?
They have one primary archivist.
And a few assistants, maybe, of the family. Understood. Well, I mean, in a way, what you're doing yourself is, and putting all this information online, is sharing that information, and it's just so useful for me. So all I can say from that point of view is thank you very much, David, for that.
Oh, certainly. Well, I will say it's a collaborative effort. I'm very fortunate to have established great relationships with collectors all over the world. And so when I write an article, I always put in there, if I'm missing a piece of information or there's something I've got wrong, please let me know. And I mean that with open arms. And people do contact me and share new insights and new findings, and then I update those articles. So things I wrote several years ago often get edited and improved, because the goal is that it will just be a real online resource for people who want to build a collection of any type of Christie.
Well, yeah, she is definitely such fun to collect, and I am fully on board collecting her at the moment. I'm hip deep in you could say at the moment, but it's been such great fun. It's been superb. Well, David, thank you very much for coming along today and having a chat with us. And I do hope the viewers head to your website, link down below, because there's an awful lot to discover there with the love of collecting Agatha Christie.
Thank you for having me.
And there we are. So if you've enjoyed today's little chat, do please give the video a thumbs up. Do please hit the subscribe button if you've not already for regular vintage paperback content. And I'll look forward to seeing you again very soon. Bye.